Once upon a time, there were two little girls who cold-heartedly made Arthur Conan Doyle believe that there were fairies in 20th century England. This incredible yet totally true story began in 1917 and ended up in 1983. Or did it actually end at all? In this video you will learn about one of the most famous and ridiculous scams of the 20th century, which fooled the celebrated author of Sherlock Holmes, as well as numerous followers of the mystic Madame Blavatsky and crowds of amateur photographers. It all started in the final years of the First World War. A 9-year-old Frances Griffiths returned with her family to England from South Africa, where she's been living for her whole life. Her father was recruited for the front, and Frances, together with her mother, was obviously going through a very stressful period in their lives. The cold and stiff upper-lipped Britain was so different to the country where they used to live. They moved with the family of her mother's sister, who also had a daughter, Elsie. The Wrights were living peacefully in Cottingley, West Yorkshire. As 16-year-old Elsie grew very fond of her cousin, and the two spent all their time together. They particularly loved to have a walk by the Cottingley Beck, the stream that ran past the foot of their garden, and played there for hours. Once Frances' mother asked how did they spend their time, and was somewhat surprised to hear the answer of her 9-year-old daughter. "We've been playing with fairies." Well, so what? Who would take the words of the small girl seriously? Her mother got mad. She didn't believe the nonsense. Yet the 16-year-old Elsie supported her younger cousin. "Yes, we are playing with fairies there." The adults still didn't believe their brave statements, yet looks like they got intrigued by the extravagance of those fantasies. Elsie's father, Arthur Wright, decided to give them a photo camera so that they could picture their fairy friends and this way prove their words. Amusingly, he only gave them a single photo negative. Obviously, back in the day you couldn't take 4 gigabytes of photos trying to make the best shoot. Surprisingly, an hour later, girls returned home enormously proud. They managed to catch the fairies on camera. Arthur Wright was a keen amateur photographer with his own darkroom and all the equipment required to develop the plate the girls had taken. So, when he performed all the manipulations, everyone saw a perfectly clear image of Frances lying in the grass with small fairies joyfully dancing around her. Come on, really? It looks like some orchestrated ancient Photoshop. That's what the entire family thought of that and kept laughing at them when they tried to talk about their fairy friends. Well, he loves best who laughs last. The girls were rather determined. 6 months later, they took the camera once again and now brought back the picture of the elder Elsie, who was sitting on the grass, appearing to engage with some little pixie elf. Does it look more convincing? What would you say? Nobody in the family thought so. This time, Elsie's father got really angry, took away the camera and forbade them from talking about fairies at all. This story might have ended right at that point, yet it turned out that it was only the beginning. 3 years later, girls' mothers, who were sisters if you remember, visited a lecture given by the unfashionable Theosophical Society of England. Briefly, Theosophs were the followers of the legendary Madame Blavatsky, who was the founder of this whole movement of spiritual mysticism. Think of those spiritual seances where everyone sits at a table, their pinkies touching the neighbors, asking questions for the dead and following the movement of the table or some outside noises in order to get the answers. These practices and theoretical studies, whatever that means, flourished at the end of the 19th century and in the first decades of the 20th century, and fascinated people who wanted to believe in magic, supernatural forces, life after death and so on. Getting back to the girls' mothers, that lecture they popped in was devoted to nothing else but the fairies in our life. Finally, those photographs found the right eyes. everyone was amazed by the stories mothers told about their daughters' experiments 3 years ago, and the images finally made it to the table of Edward Gardner, the chief secretary of the English Theosophical Society.
Good heavens!
One of the key figures in this spiritualist movement, Gardner didn't have to think twice to happily believe in the authenticity of the photos. Moreover, he apparently thought that they might become a perfect illustration of the key theosophical message that humankind was undergoing a process of transformation that would lead eventually to the perfection of species. This way, those two images were the perfect supernatural proof that great metaphysical changes were actually happening. Yet, to strengthen the case, Gardner set them for the expertise of the well-known British photographic expert Harold Snelling, who, by mere coincidence, happened to be an avid member of the Mystic Club. His dogmatic statement was straightforward. The two negatives are entirely genuine, unfaced photographs, with no trace whatsoever of studio work involving card or paper models. In other words, no Photoshop, just pure magic. True story.
Mr. Gardner had your photographs tested.
Merely as a precaution, of course. Oh, they're quite real. They're quite extraordinary.
Wait a minute, and what about Arthur Conan Doyle? What does Sherlock's author have to do with this fancy story? Yes, here is the perfect moment to introduce the perhaps most famous believer in this fairy tale.
Francis, Elsie. This is Sir Arthur Conan Doyle.
How do you do?
Through the course of his long life, Doyle had rather fluid beliefs. He migrated from being Christian to becoming a mystic and never looked back again. You may learn more about it in this video about the prototypes of Sherlock Holmes. No wonder he saw the pictures, and his spirit was ignited by this contemporary evidence of the magical powers. By coincidence, the appearance of the photographs in public happened at the same time when Doyle was working on the Christmas story for the Strand magazine, which, of course, concerned fairies. Well, it is a well-known fact that they were obsessed with fairies in the Victorian and later Edwardian England. So Doyle didn't hesitate to reach for Arthur Wright and ask for permission to use the photographs by his daughter and niece in his article. The Wrights were humbled by this proposal from their favorite writer, who was a star of unbelievable magnitude at the time, and granted him those rights for publication and even didn't take the payment for that. A fan of spirits, Doyle was still a skeptic who always challenged the numerous proofs and evidences of paranormal activities. So, before a publication with his name on it, he decided to once again set the negatives for the expertise, now with the famous Kodak photo company. Wise move, right? Yet imagine, Kodak also proved that the negatives weren't altered in any way during the post-production.
Our preliminary findings suggest that the negative plates may indeed be untouched, single exposures.
At that point, Arthur Conan Doyle was going to Australia with some lectures on spiritism, of course, and together with Gardner, they decided to ask for more photos from the Cottingley girls. Gardner sent them the latest camera and 24 plates. He was still suspicious, so he decided to put some secret marks on those negatives to track any possible manipulation. Girls didn't mind taking new photos, yet there was a condition. Not a single adult was allowed to be present at the moment, because fairies eventually wouldn't show up in front of one.
Sir Arthur would like you to take some more photographs for him.
Of course. It'll take us a moment to get ready.
So everyone decided to grab some tea and let them go alone, and a few hours later they were back with 2 new pictures with fairies in it. Gardner was astonished. It turned out they really used those very marked negatives he gave them. Arthur Conan Doyle was also persuaded by all the evidence provided. In December 1920, his article on real-life fairies goes public in the Strand magazine, illustrated by those new pictures by Elsie and Francis. Although they decided to change the names of the girls to keep them from the potentially excessive attention from the public. And what a wise decision that was! The issue was sold out in a matter of days, and everyone was discussing the mysterious creatures with some mixed feelings of awe and cringe. Certainly, many readers couldn't believe their eyes, yet they couldn't resist the authority of their favorite writer. Others went even further and proclaimed the beginning of the new era, where humanity gets ready to face the previously unknown and hidden mysteries of our being.
If these photographs are true, and nothing I have seen this morning persuades me that they are not, then we are facing the single most important discovery of our century.
And yeah, there were voices that were laughing at how easily kids could manipulate and deceive some foolish adults. Arthur Conan Doyle wasn't discouraged by that minority and soon released another article on the subject, and then, in 1922, a whole book, The Coming of Fairies, which brought up even more polarized discussions among the reading public. Well, I guess it is more or less obvious that the photos are staged. Don't they look like that, no? Yet how then did so many adequate, at first sight, people believe them? Actually, Victorian morale looked at children as pure and innocent creatures who can't do any intentional harm and deceive adults. Moreover, there were two young girls, and one of them was just 10 years old. Could you imagine that a 10-year-old girl would keep a secret for so long? How naive they were, these Victorians, huh? The two little mischiefs kept their mouths shut for 66 years.
What are we going to do? We promised we'd never tell. Never come out now. Never see them again.
Only in 1983 did the elderly Elsie and Francis tell the truth about their prank. No, they didn't plan to deceive the entire mankind. It just sort of went out of control.
Because people often say to me, don't you feel ashamed that you've made all these poor people look fools? They believed in you.
They explained that they were angry at their parents and decided to trick them. The elder Elsie painted out the images of dancing fairies from the children's book, added the wings, painted them over with watercolors, and then they cut out the fingers of the cardboard. It's funny, they failed to properly cut the little fingers, which would later make crowds of Theosophy followers argue on whether fairies have some kind of webs between their fingers.
What we did, and I said, we with the long hat pin, we put it down the back like that, and stuck the tape at the back like that, and then gradually wormed that down. They were longer than that, though. They were about that length.
It wasn't a particularly strong fixation, so the figures were trembling in the wind, which gave that movement feel to the negatives. At first, they simply didn't want to tell the truth to their parents. Then, when so many people have seen the photos and believed in fairies, Elsie and Francis were simply afraid to reveal their joke, since they didn't want to be punished for such a stir that they caused.
We didn't have to tell a lie about it at all, because always somebody came out to justify it.
And when even Sir Arthur Conan Doyle fell victim to their creation, they agreed not to say a word to anyone until his death, for the sake of the crowd's favourite author's reputation.
It was very embarrassing because, I mean, two village kids and a brilliant man like Conan Doyle, well, we could only just keep quiet.
The utmost absurdity of this whole situation is that in his book, The Coming of Fairies, Doyle reflects on the possibility of the photos having been faked. Just like the master of his deductive method, his famous Sherlock Holmes, he agrees that the only way to do that would be to cut the fairies from the cardboard. And now, attention! In his reflections, he reckons that it was by no means possible, since how could some village girls make such beautiful drawings and then cut them out so masterfully?
Clever operator? Good God, gentlemen. The girls are 8 and 12 years old, the children of ordinary working men. What cleverness would you afford them?
Amazing, isn't it? In his eyes, the probability of a 16-year-old girl being able to paint was less than the chance of meeting real fairies in the garden. At this point, I thought that he deserved to be fooled by some village girl. Wouldn't you agree?
Really, Mr. Gardner, what you are asking of Kodak is nothing less than to verify the existence of fairies. Who's next? Father Christmas?
One last thing. Elsie, the younger cousin, kept insisting that apart from making staged photos with cardboard figures, they actually saw fairies by that back. To prove that, she gave the 5th photo, where the semi-translucent fairies were dancing in the grass. She said that they actually never made that photo. Well, the contemporary specialists came to the conclusion that it was probably a result of the double exposition, as they call it. Perhaps one of the girls still made that photo, and then either accidentally took the camera off and made another photo of the grass. That's how the fairies appeared to be mingling in the grass there. And do you believe in fairies? Or perhaps you have seen them, or say some elves or ghosts somewhere? Share your stories in the comments. And yeah, hope to see you in my other videos. Stay tuned. Bye bye!